Why did disorder fakers spike so much in 2020? This is an understandably sensitive topic, so I'm going to start things out by saying the following. You probably have some sort of obvious example put in your head when you hear disorder faker from this era. This isn't targeting anyone. This isn't about anyone specific. This is not me saying that a certain person is a faker because they have a certain set of behavior, but we have had a lot of people who have come out and said that they were faking in this era of time. This is also not like proven data. This is just my personal opinion, my personal hypothesis. And I'm going to be using DID throughout this video as an example. There were other disorders that were faked in 2020, obviously, and not all people who say they have DID online are faking. That's not what I'm saying here. It's just I know more about dissociative disorders, so it makes it an easy example to work off of. To start to understand this, we first need to go back to 2020 and understand what times we're looking like. That means lockdown, COVID, pandemic times. It's an era where there were a lot of kids who were struggling with social interaction because there wasn't a lot of chance to socialize. They were stuck in their houses, not really given a chance to go out in the world like previous generations were given. This was also the spike in a lot of social media platforms like Discord, Tumblr, TikTok. These platforms sort of had a rise. They were popular platforms before, but they saw a spike during COVID times as people searched social connection during a time where they struggled to find any. This means a lot of teenagers talking to each other because those are oftentimes what these apps are aimed at. So we have a bunch of young people, adolescents, in a critical period for their social development, socialization, suddenly put in a lockdown situation, and their only source of their social needs really is going to be online. This is inherently a stressful event. We might not really realize that or think of it that way because it's normal in a sense. Everyone went through this during 2020. But it is inherently a disruption in development, a stressful event for people. Especially since people were dying. Like, people's family members were dying from COVID. There were a lot of problems. We had to watch people, going through all sorts of things. All of this will come back later when I'm discussing my point. Now, to quickly explain the disorder that I'm using as my example for this video, dissociative identity disorder, DID, is an extreme condition where high levels of dissociation cause multiple identity states to form in a single person. This used to be known as multiple personality disorder, and the identity states used to be known as alternate personalities. They're also known as alters. It's not a common mental health condition. It's also not considered statistically rare because it affects an estimated about 1% of the population, give or take. For people who have come out later and admitted to faking dissociative identity disorder online, I will say that something I've noticed is that a lot of them at some point believed it. A lot of these people tended to be younger, between 13 and 16 while they were doing this, and they were doing this around the time of 2020 to 2022 where COVID restrictions were heavy. There are outliers to this, of course, but these are trends I've noticed when I've read these stories written down in places. When people think of dissociative identity disorder, they think of the alters, the changing personality, the changing preferences, all the things that come with alters or different identity states coming in and out. Second to that, what comes to mind is the actual dissociation and the memory gaps. Something important to know about dissociation is that there's a certain level of it that is normal. There are times your brain is supposed to dissociate, and there's a certain level of dissociation happening when it's not really supposed to, where it's not really a coping mechanism that is still normal. A good example of this is if you're driving a car, and you know your way from point A to point B really well. And you feel yourself kind of pop out of your mind for a little while. Your car goes to the place, and you don't really remember any of the ride. You kind of went on autopilot. That's an example of more normal dissociation. You ask most people, and they have at least one or two of those experiences. Bad things happening increases dissociation because that's what dissociation is for. It's to help you create a healthy distance between something bad happening and your brain as a defense mechanism. So, with COVID being something that's inherently stressful with all of the lockdown stuff going on, it makes sense that a lot of people would have increased dissociation levels. I'm not going to get into explaining the complexities of this in this video, but you do need to understand that high dissociation doesn't necessarily equal DID. DID is a specific presentation of severe dissociation. You can have severe dissociation without DID. Now, if we look at this group again, you'll notice that I mentioned that these people were largely adolescents. Puberty is a major time for developing who you are and your identity, and you might feel a lot of instability in your identity during this time as you develop your own preferences, start separating yourself from your parent figures, and developing your own identity as an individual. Your mind becomes more and more independent from your caretakers in this stage of development, so your brain automatically goes to explore things, to find new things, to figure out what you are. And that might lead to frequent changes in preferences, you playing with different identities, all of those things. Now, huge amounts of alteration of identity and identity disruption during this time naturally because of development. Plus, the ongoing stress of COVID times with pandemic, of all this isolation together. I think that's what caused the huge spike in people claiming to have this disorder. And I think this line of logic can be used for a lot of other disorders that were claimed as well. So you have someone who feels their identity shifting as they figure themselves out, right? They feel their preferences changing in and out. They feel the way that they want to identify changing in and out. They feel all these different things starting to shift around. The way they feel things is changing around, all of these different things. At the same time, they're feeling more derealized and depersonalized from the isolation caused by COVID. And maybe that's causing some memory disruption due to the level of derealization, depersonalization that was common. Or the amnesia that they were experiencing wasn't dissociative amnesia, but more reasonable forgetting, because it is in the DSM criteria that if you were to be diagnosed with DID, it needs to be not in line with regular forgetting. And if someone's not well versed in the differences between what's normal forgetfulness and what's dissociative amnesia, normal forgetfulness might look like dissociative amnesia when paired with other things that might seem like symptoms to that person. I think a lot of people were genuinely not trying to fake. There were definitely people who did grift this and try to make money off of it, but I think there are a decent number of people who are younger and just mistaken genuinely. The more people who came to this conclusion for the wrong reasons, the more that these symptoms might get watered down in the online communities. But in this time when people so desperately needed communities and socialization because we weren't able to go out and have these normal levels of socialization in a critical point in development, this gave people a sense of community. This gave people to lean on, people who seemed to understand each other, people who maybe listen more than people that were at home. And the safer you feel with those people, the more you're willing to trust what they say, even if it turns out to be misinformation. Rather than malicious intent or the intention to attention seek or any of that, I think more than anything, people were lonely and they saw this community and they saw pieces of themselves in this criteria. And they genuinely thought that maybe this could be the answer to something. And people encouraged them, really validated them, and that felt safe. And in the end, I don't think harassing people like that really has any benefits. I feel that it's something you have to slowly learn about yourself, whether that's true or not. You have to go through the doctors, you have to go through everything. You have to figure out through your medical team and yourself whether it's really what's going on. Random people yelling at you on the internet isn't gonna make you stop believing something, you know? You're just gonna seem like an asshole to that person. And if it's not true, you might be pushing them deeper into malaligning with criteria. Which is another point. I think people might have Some people might have intentionally started pushing this way, but malalignment set in. Iatrogenic symptoms. Iatrogenic meaning symptoms brought about by a medical professional, or in this case, in the case of self-diagnosis, this would be the clinician, quote unquote, the person diagnosing is the individual themselves. So they're sort of self-inflicting these symptoms. The brain alters its course to try to align with the answer it's been given. And the more you do this, the more you seem to yourself to have these symptoms, to be suffering. And I think this might also be why it quote unquote fell out of fashion to fake these disorders when we started reintegrating into in real life society, because we had this need filled like it was normally supposed to be. We didn't need these specific communities. The dissociation levels went down as people were receiving their needs better, even if it was disruptive at first. And people were finding each other again. People grew up, their identities became more stable. And I think ultimately a lot of these people didn't mean harm or to actively take over a disability space, but were just looking for something they couldn't have in that time. There's a lot of shame towards those types of people, but I think there's also a certain level of understanding we should have. Yes, claiming to have a disorder you don't have isn't cool, but also they're not necessarily intentionally causing harm. Some are grifters, like we've seen actual grifters doing this. But some have fallen prey to misinformation, and some are just looking for an answer when things are really hard. This is a really tumultuous time in people's lives, and I think a little bit of understanding towards that could go a long way.